Trustee Pettigrew.
I know that this was a conversation we had last time I did this many years ago with boundaries and capacity and bonds. And one of the concerns then was that when you get a school a certain size, the competition for extracurriculars becomes pretty intense and there's less opportunities, the more students you have for those limited spaces on, say, any kind of sports team is by nature limited to the amount of students that can participate for the most part, and maybe some other, extracurricular programs. So that being said, with any of these numbers that we've been looking at, does that help or hurt those programs? And are we because in the end, we want to make sure that our students have a great high school experience and that they're all, like we said, they're all getting an equitable opportunity to participate if they so choose in a variety of experiences.
And it's going to be individual, of course, for each school. So freshman sports for us, we don't have some freshman teams and music and band and plays, and there's a lot of opportunities for growth at Etzel, so I can say that. So whether it's 200, whether it's 400, I'm confident that that would be a benefit to us. The one piece I want to just mention is cafeteria. I'm not sure that would be an issue for us, I think. We'd have to look to, options for that because we're pretty full, so.
Absolutely, and this would be Tom's area, but I do remember Tom saying at one of our earlier discussions on this is that, when you expand one area, then we have to consider expanding the cafeteria as well.
And lockers.
And lockers,
and
right.
Parking and stuff like that.
So Tim and I did not look at, we do know the cafeteria is small though. Yeah, but we didn't discuss that part.
Trustee Berry.
I think if Abe Mashur hits the Powerball tomorrow night, all of our problems will be solved, because I know he'll donate.
Absolutely.
But we're not gonna end up with the perfect decision here, but I've, for the last 10 years I've been involved, Trustee Lane's always advocated for equal opportunity, equitable opportunities. And I think it was Trustee Hammoud, if my memory serves me right, mentioned that, yeah, we had a great exit report from Advanced Ed, but that was one of the weaknesses in our school district. And we always hear it. As soon as the STEM program closes down, we always hear from parents that my son or my daughter didn't make it, early college, and I can sit here and spit off all the rest of the programs that students don't have equal opportunity to get into the programs. Auto shop, for example, Trustee Lane mentioned auto shop. If I live in the Etzel Ford area and I know my student, 15, 16-year-olds, loves to work on cars, whatever, does he or she have that same opportunity? So if we're going to live in a perfect world, yes, everybody would have. If it's a 9th grader, 10th grader, at any of the high schools, would have the same opportunities as everybody else. But we're lacking that department, and we can't just concentrate on one area and not the whole district.
Thank you. I guess we're ready for discussion. Okay. Did you want to frame the discussion? I would like to ask something too when you're done.
Sure. So the construction updates, I think Tom said we're comfortable because the board has seen that. We just gave the numbers, so that was basically what we want. I don't know if you want to just brief and then.
The numbers that I gave earlier did include additional lockers and a cafeteria extension at each of the 3 buildings. So those are included in those numbers I shared earlier.
Good.
So just what we have time set for discussion here, and we've been having discussion throughout, which has been great. I think it's been a great dialogue. I appreciate all the trustees' time, and it's a lot of time on a day with snow. All of the individuals who are here, thank you for the team. I think everyone here, I believe, is in it for the best interest of the students, and again, trying to protect the long-term stability of the district. We're here, we're in these positions to make those tough decisions to protect the students, and that's why we're here. So one of the things our administration is asking for is for some, by the next meeting to have some what we call immediate relief. Specific to Dearborn High, we have the proposals. Oh, public comment. Okay. There was. We didn't have any blue cards. Sorry.
There are no blue cards.
Yeah, there was no. Sorry, we should have mentioned that. There were no comments, no comment cards. Thank you. And so we're hoping to do a couple of things. You heard Tom talk about the infrastructure. So what we'd like to do, in talking about the bond of 2019, is to hopefully by the next meeting, because if we want to do anything for September, we need to get that decision by the middle of March, because if we go into April, it's too late as far as logistics and things we need to do with class schedules and all the work that we're going to need to do. So we'd like to get some short-term relief, and then what we're saying is we'd like to, hopefully the board to consider a infrastructure committee that would look at the infrastructure of the district along the lines of, whether that be ninth grade academy to high school to anything. It could be, we had Abe Mashur had talked about, athletic field earlier. And then most importantly, to be honest, the most important thing is the list that Tom had mentioned of the upgrades that are going to be necessary in the current, so we're hoping that we can get a direction by the board to pursue that. My understanding is that in 2002 there was, for a bond, you would get a committee, and David can speak to it. I think Trustee Petlichkoff was on the committee, that we would get this infrastructure committee together to look at current infrastructure, to look at future. That could be whether it be expansion and current needs, and to make a decision moving forward for the potential of the 2019, that we would have to make a decision which would be a bond that would not result in a tax increase based on the way we refinanced and saved money. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Our administration had talked, and I think it's prudent for us to give you a recommendation. So that's the one. We like to have an infrastructure committee, but as far as the short term, and again, we've had all the individuals that are here are part of that. Some of them weren't. A couple of them may not have been there when we took the final decision. But when we met with the high school principals, I got to tell you, that kind of turned us a little bit with that proposal 5, and that's hearing from them. But it's been a teamwork. We've spent a tremendous amount of hours, our team. The amount of data, and the board knows this because we know this stuff because of the fact of all the data that you've been getting, which you got to siphon through. I would never have been able to do it myself. So I really appreciate the team. They've been phenomenal, whether it be Mr. Jafer, who's here, Mr. Mustonen going to the community, to Mr. Mashur on the numbers, Mark Andrews on transportation, Tom on finances, Mason on working with Abe either on numbers or going into buildings capacity, and then the high school principals. What is the reality currently in their school? Because that's important as well. Critical, actually. What's the impact on students? So our administration believes that we would be comfortable if the board were to approve. We had our list, and there's pros and cons to everything, and that's why we're saying, there's not a perfect solution. As you see, there's certain things here, and then maybe transportation goes up, and vice versa. So when we came to a conclusion, we took a vote amongst our team after looking at all the factors, and we've done it several times, and we've transitioned. And as far as the immediate relief, what we talk about population relief, our team liked 5B, 5A, and 2. Those we could live with any of them, but I did mention them in rank order. And again, they have, we would be comfortable with any of those, but we would like to see some relief, especially to Dearborn High. And if we go back to well over 2 years ago, this conversation started because of Dearborn High. And Mr. Martin, when you were here last time, it was, look, we need some relief now for our current students. We can't wait. So we need to do some things now, and then we can look at an infrastructure plan moving forward. And I know the board has already given us direction. We haven't officially approved it, but it'll come before the board in March, Tom. Correct. The financials on the 4 classrooms in the cafeteria at Dearborn High. The Etzel has not come before the board. We haven't gotten an approval by the board yet on that, and the same with the Berry Center. But as you see, the proposals we are mentioning do include those expansions in our plan, especially at Etzel Ford with some of the numbers. And then if we were to do 5A, as you heard from Ms. Al-Qadri, you really need that Berry Center as well with Dr. Green. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there and frame it and just let the board know if we're going to do some relief for next year, and I've said this the last several months at the meetings, we need to make the decision by the next meeting, and that's why we've been putting out all this data out publicly going back to last May, and it's also why we wanted to get the modified proposals based on the community forums out at the last board meeting so people could start absorbing and reflecting on it. And I got to tell you too, that the community forums, and I appreciate the people in the audience, it did have an impact on me. I had some other ideas of the proposals that I thought initially, and it changed my mind. It really did. I'm going to tell you that I'm sure the team would say the same thing, and that had a heavy impact and a heavy weight on, because from an academic, you might always be saying, well, feeder check, feeder check, feeder track, but then when you take the community input and the transition, so that I'm so glad we did that, and I appreciate the community and the board, and I'm sure the board probably felt that way as well, and that's why you had directed us to go out there. So I feel really good about this team, the board. I appreciate your great, strong leadership and partnership. I'm confident that we'll come to a decision. I know you have another important decision coming with the college presidents. You have a lot on your mind right now. And then not to throw another wrinkle in, but we've kind of keeping it the early college. We got to keep that on the. We want to expand that. It's good for our students. There's going to be some financial commitment there. We met with John Satowski, so I don't want to lose sight of that. It may not solve this issue, but I also want to continue to make Dearborn #1 in the state for our students. And the college wants to expand. The partnership with the college is so critical. So there will be some monies that will be needed. So whether that's part of that infrastructure committee or other ways, we don't want to lose that. And we had a very positive meeting on Monday, and there's still a lot of work to do. But after we went in our administration there with Mr. Falella today, we just feel so good about the partnership with the college. I got to tell you that. And it's getting better and better all the time. And that's why, you know, the high school principal is going and working with Dr. Green, Dr. Musellem, Shannon Peterson, and these academies. We're going to go study. The Ford wants to partner with Next Generation Learning. Yeah. So we do want to look not just into building a room for our students to go to. We want to look at program enhancement that's going to make our students career and college ready, or go directly into careers that are marketable, that they're going to do well financially after graduation. So I just wanted to frame it out there, and I see a lot of nods from the administrators here. And so again, I appreciate everyone's involvement, including community members who have been here, but it's been really a great team. So I applaud all of you, I really do, the amount of time that you've all put in between the board and the administrative community. So I'm going to give you all a big round of applause for your time. Thank you.
I think I'm going to try to summarize what you just said. It seems like we're in a two-part thing. We have overcrowding, and we need to deal with that issue. And we have a recommendation from the administration that we look at 2, 5A and 5B.
And
And?
that's just their recommendation.
Yes, it's
right?
their recommendation, and that was one of the things I wanted to ask, because they've been so heavily involved and they know the students, et cetera. So the other part is that we have an infrastructure issue, and it's going to be very costly, and I think you're asking that we have some kind of a committee that looks at the infrastructure for the future, how we're going to pay for it, and what is it that we need. But tonight, we're supposed to be dealing with the issue of overcrowding, right? And so we have a recommendation from the administration to look at 5A, 5B, and 2. And I think that frames our conversation and our discussion for the rest of the evening. Is that correct, if I summarize this appropriately? Anybody want to say anything more? Okay, let's go with the discussion. What?
Oh,
am I going too fast
before we get to the
for you?
discussion,
I'm just getting tired, that's all. Yeah.
I know you're tired. Before we get to the discussion, I know Dr. Malika already praised his team. I know we praised the community, but specifically as to the team that has been working day in and day out, honestly, on this issue. I know Abe's lost weight. I've seen, you know, Mesa, she's dyeing her hair more often, you know. But no, seriously, there were times where I'd get anxiety about this because that's how important it was. And you guys made it so much easier because I know that you were investing day in and day out in studying these issues, putting your numbers together, and specifically as to the high school principals. Sometimes we think we know, but we rely on you because you are in those schools every single day.
Correct.
And that is why your opinion means so much to us. The opportunities that you see our students taking advantage of or what they need and so on, that is so important. And thank you for dealing with this. Specifically, I mean, Mr. Martin, what you've been dealing with, and hopefully relief is coming soon. So as to every single one of you, thank you. And I think I speak on behalf of all my colleagues when I say that.
You do.
And that is why I think it's important that we do hear your recommendation. And that is why your recommendation is personal to me, is because I trust this team. And I will take and as we're discussing this, I want you to know that I take your recommendation very seriously.
Thank you. Well said. Trustee Barry. I'm sorry, I called you Dr. Barry. I'm so tired. Trustee Barry, yes.
You know what, yes, I stand with my colleagues and Dr. Maleko. Thank you for what you do on a daily basis. It's
Yep.
from the bottom of my heart, without a doubt.
Yep.
Okay? I am ready to support, matter of fact, I did support the immediate attention that Dearborn High needs. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that we have an issue there that we have to deal right away. But I also heard tonight, and I've been getting emails telling me about a long-term solution. I guess my question would be, Dr. Maleko, what does that mean if we're ready to move and start spending $5.5 million here, another few $1 million there? Wouldn't that be part of the discussion for a long-term solution?
Well, we've already, my team, unanimous on this. Those classrooms that you're looking at, and again, I know it's not, minor dollars because you're talking in the millions. But when we talk about major, the ability to have to bond and go to the taxpayer, that's what I'm talking about as far as infrastructure. Short term, and I can have the high school principals speak to this, I was a principal, we can enhance, those classrooms will never go to waste. I'm going to tell you that right now. I'm not talking about the major expansion with 15 to 20 classrooms. I'm talking about the 4, the 7, and the 6. Those will always be an asset if you spend now, even if you have other long-term solutions. And we agreed on that. Speaking as a principal who was in a building, I was middle school and elementary, high school principal can speak to that too. And that's why sometimes, even though when Mason came up and said you have space, yes, but as Mr. Martin knows, it impacts programs. You can be more dynamic with your programs and your special classrooms and the things you can do with space. So the 4 classrooms at Dearborn High will never go to waste, I can assure you of that. And the same would be for the Etzel. And the Berry Center wouldn't either, because you're talking about enhancing, as I was mentioning, curriculum and program and career orientation. Those are going to be helpful for your students, and it's going to be an investment that will never go to waste. Now, when you're talking about bigger ticket items, like new buildings, then you've got to be cautious and be sure that that's what you want to do. And that's why we're saying go with the long term or an infrastructure, be the same thing, long-term infrastructure study. And Tom, and then now we're saying is we need to consider those, because Tom has had that on the docket with the Building and Site Committee going back last year. But he's the one that really brought that to my attention in the last several, maybe month, as far as don't lose sight of these other issues, because if we are looking at big ticket purchases, we really need to study those other areas of the district. So when I say long-term infrastructure, I would say that would include any potential new buildings or renovating, buying buildings, or it would be looking at just upgrading the $162 million in the current infrastructure. So that kind of, and what we're saying is let's follow the model that occurred in 2002, I believe it was.
Yeah,
And
2002.
let a group come together, because
And that was a large group.
Yeah, because that's about a bond. Now you're talking
Yeah,
about a
it's a
bond,
bond.
and that's when you want a bigger group coming together to discuss that. So that would be our recommendation. It's at the pleasure of the board, but I think we'll be in a good state. I'm strongly recommending that those classrooms will be used effectively by our principals and they're nodding. And so I would like us to move forward with those renovations within current budget that we can do, or if we had to bond without going to the taxpayers. But Tom says that Tom, you could speak to that. You would be comfortable with us financially on those 3 renovations. Is that correct?
If you remember the conversation earlier with John and that was here earlier, that the timing of it all, if any kind of long-term solution we do with the bond issue, that vote won't even occur until the November of 19, which means you couldn't really do any planning or construction costs for at least 6 to 7 months after that for planning. So then you're really pushing out almost 3 years, 4 years out. Where if we do this stuff internally, the ones we're talking about here, that's something we can start planning now and potentially get done in 2 years. So it's just got to watch the timing of it. So the 2 years is considered short time for us, short term, where the infrastructure plan is out there still a good 3 to 4 or 5 years.
Sure. Dr. Maleko, I completely agree with you that those classrooms will not go to waste. And I strongly believe any investment we'll make that will not go to waste. We started our discussion that we need to keep an eye on our middle schools. And and I don't need to remind you that we have elementaries with 800-plus students in them. So I honestly believe, in the discussions I've had with many community members, not just parents, some of our, longtime supporters that don't have kids in the school system, they want a long-term solution too. So I honestly believe that any investment that we make, especially a growing district like us, will not go to waste.
Yeah, well, thank you, I appreciate it. And that's why I do agree that we need that infrastructure committee to look at those other aspects, including elementary and middle, which the board has talked about. So thank you, I agree.
Steve Thorpe. Aye, yeah, I got it right.
So several different points from what's been brought up. So what I'm hearing then is the long-term planning is really going to be done probably over a 6-month period, because it'll be used from the bond money that we wouldn't be able to even go for until fall of 19. So it's not that we're really pushing things off. We know we need immediate relief at Dearborn High. But at Edsel Ford, we don't, because you've currently got space, and we'd be phasing kids into that over 4 years. So that could wait a year or two as cash becomes available. We've got the money from Wayne County for a couple more years. We've got the sale proceeds from Howe. But the one thing I would also push back on is, I know the additional space wouldn't go to waste, but we also have to make sure that we're using the taxpayers' dollars effectively. And I can tell you, if I put an addition on my house, I would find a use for it. But do I need it? That's all I would say about that, is I know that we could probably find it, but trying to make sure we're putting the dollars towards the best possible use.
Okay, I've got a couple of things that I want to, and Tom did touch upon the one thing that the long-term solution is so many years out, that spending the money to alleviate the problem currently is a wise investment, I believe, since we aren't going to be going to the taxpayer at this moment. I've got a couple of concerns. One is something that we heard from several of the parents during the forums, and that is, if you're a parent, and we do change boundaries to help alleviate the overcrowding issues, if you've got a freshman going in ninth grade and you've got a junior or a senior at another building right now, how are we going to help those parents? If we start grandfathering in everybody who's in that situation, then the numbers may not work anymore. I mean, I don't know what those numbers would look like. So have we had, this is something I've really struggled with, how do we help? Because if I was a parent in that situation, it would be quite alarming to know that I had kids, I had to hit Fortson and I had to hit another school at the same
Sure.
time, same night.
Well, we discussed that, so I can let Mr.
Yeah,
Schur, I'll
we-
let him speak to that.
We discussed that thoroughly, and it's not going to affect the overall numbers that much if we allow those students to attend the same school as a sibling. Now, if the student is a current senior and he's leaving, then they don't have anybody else at that school, so they would go, if somebody was an incoming freshman, they would go to whatever school we decide with the new boundaries if that decision is made. But if they have like a current junior who's going to be a senior, or a current sophomore who's going to be a junior, then no, we would grandfather them in and let them go to the
Do
same
we know
school.
what those numbers would look like?
They wouldn't be.
You don't think
No,
so?
it's not, no, it's not going to impact that much. This is a similar situation to what we had with River Oaks and Lindbergh and Hague a couple years back when we did that. I mean, we can look and get the exact number, but it's not going to affect the overall high school population if it's even, 20 students from one building or whatever that have
Okay.
siblings and so on.
The next thing I want to say in my philosophy of approaching this is, and I've said this to everybody, is that I want a solution that's the least disruptive to the family members, with still achieving the results that we need in order to help this. But I also want to say that if we are going to move forward with looking at a long-term solution that could potentially result in another building of some fashion or another, that I want to make sure that we don't have another flip of boundaries in 5 years and because we need to then fill that building. So I want to make sure, to the degree that I don't want to have a huge movement of students from one side of town to another, and then shift them all back again if we were to have a solution like that be approved. So I want to make sure that our solutions, and quite frankly, I think 5A and 5B do pretty much align the students so that if something like that were to occur, which we don't know it would be the least disruptive, and it would already have the students pretty much in place in their neighborhood to begin with, as much as possible.
Well, I know you had mentioned that at the last meeting.
Yeah.
I think this, then, what would happen is that would then go to that infrastructure committee that would have to consider that, because obviously, they would then have to consider whatever they may do to do
Would
it, whether it be
impact, yeah.
property location or whatever that may be, that it needs to be, that it's going to be least disruptive. But if you start looking at, as Mr. Mashur talked about with the ninth grade academy or the high school, the reality is you're gonna have disruptions
Gonna move,
anyway.
yeah.
But I understand what you're saying is you don't want to have it to happen again, and then someone has to move again. But I would say then that would be the job of that committee to really
To consider that.
consider, because we wouldn't be able to go back at, it would be, we would have to give them a clear direction if that's what we wanted to do, to say, look, when you look for solutions for the infrastructure, we don't want to have major changes from what we had already changed. And I think that was part of the discussion, I think, with a couple of the areas like the Maples students, the River Oaks, where they were moved and then move them again. I think that's why the 5A and 5B take care of that kind of philosophy of not having to move them again. So I do appreciate that point of view, because that would be something we definitely want to have consideration. I think the difference with the River Oaks when we moved the students from Lindbergh and Hague back is that at the time they didn't want to move, and what happened is the committee had promised them at one time, once there was expansion, they would move them back. And that was a different
That
scenario.
was all, yes,
Yeah.
that was always the understanding from the
yeah. So
very
thank you,
beginning.
Yeah, we'd have to make that committee, and the last time, my understanding, and you would know more, is that we didn't have the superintendent or board members on this committee. This was a big committee of the whole with administrators, community, and it was actually run by an outside consultant.
It was an outside facilitator that ran it.
And they coordinated the
Yes,
whole thing.
yes.
For recommendation.
And there was nobody from the board
And
or superintendent.
And we would call that an if we did it, it would be a 6 month to look at infrastructure, because you'd have to do that for the 2019. It may or may not mean that you're doing any new buildings or anything. You may or you may not, I don't know, but you definitely need to look at current infrastructure too. And so that committee would need to study that, for that bond. And that's why I also appreciate Tom's work in recommending, it was a year and a half ago, I believe, when we refinanced with the college. We saved the taxpayers money at the time, and we have ourselves set up so we can do this bond to take care of those areas. And the board, because the board did direct us to, to move in those areas, working with the college. We saved by partnering with the college too.
Well, then I think we do need to make it very clear, if we do set up this infrastructure committee, that their task is not to be to look at a ninth grade academy and another high school as their only task. Because they may be going in there with that assumption, and I would rather say, look, we're going to be looking at a bond approximately this size. These are the needs that they could potentially be used for. Now you figure out what the priority is and how you can best spend that money, those taxpayer dollars, that will get us the best results for our district.
I thought that we've already learned that there's about $162 million worth of infrastructure that needs to be enhanced, so that this.
Over a 3 to 10 year period, so maybe we can push a couple off. If they come up with something else.
It's a big amount of money
So-
that has
so
to be bonded anyway.
What I
right?
want to make sure is the
Okay.
task force understands that there's going to be prioritization done, and it's
Yeah.
not necessarily just going to be looking at a high school and where can we put it, and then walk away.
Yeah, I hear you. Good point. Trustee Nasser.
So looking at proposals 5A and
Yeah.
5B,
Yeah.
and the number of students that would be going to each of the schools, I don't like the fact that with 5B, it sends about 45% more students to Etzel Ford, and making it larger than Dearborn High and almost as big as Fortin. with 5A, Fortson has the capacity to keep all those students because of the large number of students that are at other programs. I just feel that one makes the most sense. It keeps the areas closer together, and I favor that one of the three.
May I, may I ask the principals what they think about this observation?
I said earlier,
You said 5A for those reasons.
Exactly.
But what about Dearborn?
Well, I got
No, I agree with
Don't
Scott.
hurt him, okay.
I agree with Scott. 5A makes the most sense. Yeah.
The numbers for Dearborn High
So my
stay the
numbers
same.
stay the same, but in terms of student movement, the UNIS students going back to Fortson, Ms. Alcadre has some plans for them. She has some empty space. I think it makes the most sense for everybody. Ms. Petrikoff, you talked about least amount of movement.
Least amount of movement,
And
which
that
is
one,
5A.
and that one is, yeah. So
Yes.
So both of you are talking about 5A? Correct. And Ms.,
We're a team.
you're a team. What, you
They-
don't
they-
dare say,
I
take
s-
another point of view?
I support whatever's best for kids.
No, I don't want you to say that.
Well,
What's your
I-
reason?
Actually, I'm torn. I mean, 5B has less students for Fortson, but the movement, we were just discussing, is a big concern, and I understand.
Okay.
Movement in terms
The-
of busing, you mean?
And also with 5B, and if we're taking it down to 2,600 and then we have 500 students gone, we're way under capacity at Fortson.
Ah,
We'd be at 2,000.
I see a lot of heads wagging, that makes
I wanted
sense.
to also say that we actually had 6 classrooms added at Fortson, and we're using 2 of the 6.
Have we
this
been here
year.
that long that you got additional classes?
Dr. Green, you wanted to say?
Obviously, 5A would continue our plans to expand and grow. We would be able to support, the 3 comprehensive high schools, give them some relief, and continue to enhance our programs.
Well, if everybody's in agreement, why did we get 5A, 5B, and 2? Is there anybody on that team?
Yeah, we've got.
Is there anybody on the team that is favoring something other than 5A? Okay.
We were
that's helpful
comfortable
to
with
know.
all 3. We were
Tim
fine with.
Brzezinski is raising his hand.
5B was just to get Fortson's numbers down.
Okay,
And sign his.
yes,
Just
Trustee
for
Barry.
anybody from the team or Dr. Maleko can answer this. What was the drawbacks between 6 and 5A? What was the difference? Just what were you thinking when you were making that decision?
Number 6.
6 was.
The
6 was,
numbers-
6 was a full move of Woodworth.
Yeah.
So there was some
Yeah.
thought on that, but that was just when the
Because,
team.
because it would be a great disruption. It's not only a full move of Woodworth, but then
River Oaks.
Stout also goes from Dearborn High to Fortson.
Right.
And the Dearborn
And
Heights.
Smith.
And,
So,
I'm looking
Yeah.
at the numbers, numbers at Dearborn High.
yeah, the numbers are relatively the same. Fortson's still obviously on the higher end, but then there's also a lot of movement, a lot of change, a lot of disruption. So that's kind of why we, decided with 5A or 5B as opposed to 6, because there was less disruption in both of those proposals.
And it doesn't really relieve Dearborn, and if you remember, Mr. Martin spoke about, what the halls can currently handle. You can add some classrooms, but we also have to realize what the halls.
So it's almost 200 less students for Dearborn High with 5A
Yeah.
and 5B as
Yeah.
opposed to 6.
Does anybody on the board have any objection to 5A, the recommendation?
I don't think we can get there right now.
Well, we
There's
gotta,
still
we gotta
discussion.
vote on it next.
Yeah, we have to
next
wait till
board.
there's a motion and we'll deal with it.
Oh,
then,
okay,
yeah.
I'm just, for discussion
Yeah.
purposes, has anybody else got anything they want to say about 5B, or, yes? Trustee Hamud.
First, I want to make it clear that, for me, I'm considering 5A or 5B as opposed to the other proposals. Not solely because your great team recommended it, because I had to study these myself, but Trustee Petlichkov had recommended last time that we talk about what's important to us when we're making this decision.
Yes.
And I think it's very important for us to say, what we're looking at and why it's important to us, as opposed to the other proposals. It's great that you recommended it, but I've been looking at 5A and 5B. One, like Trustee Petlicoff has stated, and I just jotted down some things of why those stood out to me. And I was looking for proposals that disrupt the least amount of students and have the greatest number of impact, and make it in a way that makes sense for longevity, and I know we just touched on that. And if we're going to disrupt, and we are, it should be for a good reason. And we have to make those sacrifices justifiable. And
Say that again.
we have to justify those sacrifices.
Okay, thank you.
And two, I'm always looking for educational opportunities. I know that, and I mentioned this earlier, sometimes we're talking about numbers. Should we put them, if we take them from here or put them in another building? What are the educational opportunities for the students? And that comes with, okay, we're going to make those sacrifices, but these are the educational opportunities. And when I think about that, I do think of career and college readiness, which I was glad to hear today. And equity. To me, equity is very important. And again, I go back to the advanced ed team and accreditations, and they said that equity is something we should continuously work on, and that was one of the points that they wanted us to work on. And when I talk about equity, I have to say that it can never be perfect, right? Obviously, things are not always going to be equitable. But again, that's always the beginning of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. And when I think of equity and some of the proposals, it's, whether it's affecting the River Oaks area, for example. That area that's been hit every single time almost from, and I know my seniors that have been on the board for much longer have mentioned this before. That's why I wasn't in favor of Proposal 2, because I know that area did have to go through changes in the past. Those are still our taxpayers, they are our family, and they are part of this district, so I want to take them in consideration. When we talk about equity in terms of ninth grade students being affected at Fortson, but ninth grade students not having to be affected at the other two high schools, that brings concern to me. Because this options like the ninth grade academy, and I haven't heard anything in terms of, I'm not talking about whether it's good or bad, but what I think about is, when I think of equity, I'm not thinking about a building and how many students it will fit in, and this is how much it will cost. I'm thinking, what are my concerns? What are some concerns that I've read up on? When we're talking about complaining about shifting students and taking them from one place to another, you're talking about moving students to three different schools in 3 years. From middle school to a ninth grade academy to high school. When we talk about opportunities, but also when we talk about curriculum, because you're going to have a ninth grade academy, then you're going to have to talk about a different curriculum for those students. And so that's what I think about why those two proposals, 5A and 5B, and also fiscal responsibility. This board has a responsibility, and I know that every single one of you agrees with that. We have a responsibility to the taxpayers as a whole. And how we choose to spend their money is our responsibility. And we have to sleep at night being comfortable knowing that we are providing the best educational opportunities, but at the same time using that money responsibly. We are talking a lot of numbers here. And eventually, we're going to have to talk a lot of numbers when it comes to infrastructure. And we have to upkeep our schools. Can we at least start going forward and making a difference and trying to solve this issue, because we do have an issue, and at the same time be conscious with the way we spend our money. So those are the things that I care about, and after looking at all the options, I'm looking at proposal 5A and 5B. I am torn, however, I am concerned about the busing at Etzel, and I do have a lot of confidence in the opportunities that are coming to Fortson, and you are at that school every day. Do you think that Fortson can handle that number with proposal 5A? Or do you think that the students will be disadvantaged if this board was to choose 5A?
Today, we have about 2,800 students, and again, working with Dr. Masalam and Dr. Green on more opportunities and going into this Career Academy concept that I'm working on, the opportunities are just going to expand, and more students will be at a place where it's going to focus on their career ambitions. It's not about classrooms with me, it's about what am I providing them? Am I giving them what they want? Am I setting them up for a good future? That's how I'm looking at it. So we've got 2,800 and we're doing it.
And in terms of Etzel, if we do add all the students with proposal 5B and putting Etzel at, 2160, how is that going to affect the educational opportunities of your students? And do your students leave the high school like the Fortson students do?
Not at that level, no. So I'm more confident and more comfortable with the 1880 number, frankly. 5A.
Because of educational impact?
I think overall impact, all things considered.
Thank you.
Can I comment too? With the 5A, and I'll just kind of tell you where the 5B came from. It came from the committee. It was after the initial where we had a 5, and the reason was specifically was mentioned some comments that if you get potentially an influx on 5B of immigrants or other students. Now we're not sure. We can't predict that if something were to happen in a few years. So that was a consideration giving. But 5A, to be honest, from a financial. So there's pros and cons to both. You're alleviating, and that's why we had Hiam there saying, look, she can handle 5A. The reality, though, of 5A is you are probably, what Trustee Thorpe had said about the expansion at Etzel, that would be something with what Mason said is you may not need to do that. You may or may not. We'd have to really look at that more closely. But with 5B, you would be looking at that. And then what happened is you are looking at an operational cost on transportation with 5B. So yesterday as our team, and I'll be honest, when we sent it in, we're very comfortable with either 5A or 5B. I'm not, it's not like we just kind of took a vote with all factors and we said, well, if we factor everything, yesterday we came, but maybe after this discussion in these 4 hours, my team will say, maybe it's 5A now, and part of that is when you look at transportation and other factors. So that's just so you know how the 5B came about, and it really had to do with you're not really shifting a lot of students to leave Fortson, but it was all because of what he had said with the 4 classrooms that we internally did renovations, which is what you would have to do at Etzel, which is actually what we did at Dearborn High a year ago to create some internal classrooms because of this current space. And so from a financial aspect, the 5A would be a better option, both on the transportation aspect, hearing from the community, and mentioning fiscal responsibility, which all your trustees I know it's an important factor. The only risk, just to put it out there, is of not alleviating Fortson. So then you really have to make sure we're soundly invested in Dr. Green's program, and then secondly, the early college programs.
Yeah. And can I say, if we're going to invest something into Fortson to help support that number of students, because we've all been hearing the reports, we need to, I think, really look at our counseling services, because if HIM has got a career pathway that is going to require a much more hands-on development for the students, you're going to need the staff in order to provide them, and I know that you don't have anywhere near what I'm hearing the national average is
250 to 1.
Well, that's the recommendation. The national is 450 to 1, and we're like at how many they say Michigan has got, their average is 700 to 1. I don't even know what Fortson's
for the first year I got at Fortson, I added a counselor, and then the district added another. So I'm up to 7 counselors, and I have a second graduation specialist. They're at 400 to 1 right now.
Okay, so they're within that.
And maybe within my budget, I add another one, because that's a big part of these kids finding success in their high school career.
So, Trustee Hammoud, do you think you got your answer? You feel comfortable with that?
I feel
Okay.
comfortable with that, and I feel comfortable with the fact that this forces us to make sure that we are providing those opportunities. Now that's our responsibility, because we owe that to them. And I know that one in specific that I'm very excited about is Hiam and Shannon, Dr. Maleko. I wanted to go, and Dr. Chokol as well is going, and then I had a jury trial that I can't get out of. But they're actually going to Nashville, Tennessee on Monday to look at some opportunities for our students with Ford Motor Company. And I know that this is something, to me, this should have been something that maybe we should have worked on a long time ago. So I'm glad to finally see it come and to create career pathways specifically in that area. Go there and get us some money and make sure we bring those programs to our students. So.
Okay, just want to warn everybody, we have 10 minutes.
I'll be quick. We haven't talked
Trustee
about
Lane.
a committee composition. So, Dr. Maleko, if we do put together a committee for long-term study, one person or group of people, a couple people maybe, that I'd like to see on there would be maybe some Ford people. We definitely need Dr. Green to be suggesting people, I don't know, Mr. Bayerl or whoever, Dr. Bayerl, whomever, sorry, I got a lifesaver. But future, particularly future strong career paths that we know students are going to be interested in. I know one that people are talking about is cybersecurity studies. I don't know which other ones they are, but maybe taking care of older folks, that's a huge
That's a
thing.
good idea.
Healthcare, STEM, yeah, some of us.
Yeah, right now.
Yeah, whatever, but we need strong career paths to be in Dr. Green's program to relieve all of the, I mean,
The cybersecurity is also one of the discussions with the colleges and early college.
good, great, I love
Trustee
that.
Thorpe, excuse me. Trustee Thorpe?
Looking at 5A and 5B, and really all the proposals, one of the things that I also want to remember, besides the least disruption, is the community and having schools close to where you live. So I do appreciate the fact that a portion of the students that were going to Dearborn High could then go to Fordson, which is much closer, and I would assume then part of the community more. With that reason, I would be more towards 5A, because it looks like in 5B, you've got kids that might be 2 blocks from Fordson going to Edsel, and that gets the same point that we talked about with those Stout kids that go to Fordson. But I would be concerned at the same point, based on the number that we're currently projecting at Fordson, the population growth is probably going to continue on the east side. And even if you're able to get so many kids over to the Berry Center, if kids still are coming up into that area, then we could be having to deal with Fordson again in just a couple of years, whereas 5B would take you drastically lower. So those are some of the thoughts that are going through my head with these ideas.
Good thoughts. Help me to understand what we're doing at the board meeting in March. Are we going to have motions that relate to each one of these proposals, or are we going to have a motion that just says 5A?
That moves,
Or
yes,
how do
we would have
do
a
it?
motion
Well-
that would move forward.
There'll be a motion to formally move forward with the additions to Dearborn High and to Berry, right? Or have we?
That'll be on the financial side, right, Tom, as, with Dearborn High anyway.
Dearborn High will actually have a motion by the board to approve the contracts. That's just on Dearborn High. That'll be an actual formal motion that we'll prepare and put on the agenda from prior board direction.
And so are we still comfortable with holding off? I mean, because the only problem with holding off with Edsel and holding off with Edsel and Michael Berry is
Construction.
construction
Just
costs.
holding off on construction.
With construction, but that, those costs continue to rise when you put those opportunities on hold. And so then the numbers are gonna change, and our potential to do it without having to tap into some other funding is we might lose that as we move further into the year. And you're going to lose the opportunity too with weather conditions and whatnot. I mean, you're just going to keep on pushing it and pushing it further. If we all are in agreement that it seems like a reasonable use of the money, then I'm not sure that putting it on hold is going to accomplish what we hope for. Now, if you really think that it's an unnecessary expenditure, then now's the time to say that.
I would think it would depend on if we choose 5A or 5B. That's really going to have the biggest impact on Edsel and the need for an addition. At
Well,
least on that.
But do we still want
one
to
of those
move
three.
forward with Michael Berry Career Center? Because that is, her programming is supposed to help support 5A's
Right.
numbers. So I don't want to just keep in mind Dearborn High.
I don't think we should keep just the Michael Berry Center based on what Fortson's numbers are. I think if we have the opportunity to expand our
Just the programs.
programs,
Yes, that's what I'm
we
saying.
should do
Yeah.
that regardless.
The Edsel too, if I can just point out, I'm not saying that the additions aren't, I think we need to study it a little more further. So when we're saying it might be a possibility, we got to get with Mr. Casebolt and get more of a thorough study. We've got numbers from Mason, but we would want to really look at that more closely before we said as far as the Edsel. But you're right. I mean, the 5A is more of a potential, but that's why I would just say, would you just give us direction? We'll really look at that if the board chose 5A, then we'd really look at the numbers here, try to match it up and get a real more in-depth study done, walkthrough with exactly the capacity we have there.
Yes, sir.
Just to be clear, I mean, if we go with 5A, 5B, whatever we go with, that's not going to be automatic that we're spending money on Michael Berry Career Center, is it?
No, because we're not ready yet.
We're
We
not
have to
ready.
bring it before the board for.
Okay, yeah, that's to start in
but-
committee, then come before the board, if I'm correct.
Sure, but we would want what you gave us direction, several months ago to
Dearborn
start
High.
moving.
Dearborn High.
on
Dearborn
the-
High is a whole different
Yeah.
story. Dearborn High, we need immediate relief now. Yesterday,
Sure,
we need
yeah.
relief, so.
But what I'm saying is, if you approve 5A at the next meeting, we'd like to be able to go out and get all the financials and all the detail for Michael Berry and possibly Edsel and bring it back to you. It wouldn't be approved then because we're not ready for that. But we would at least like that direction to go, to get more specific. Tom, and maybe you can,
Yeah, what I think Dr. Lango is mentioning is that we at least incur some architectural costs to start designing it. So if the board does go forward with that plan, we'll be that much further along.
Dr. Mead, motion to extend the meeting 15 minutes.
Any second?
Second.
All
Roll
those
call,
in
Hussein
favor?
Berry, yes.
Yes.
Fadwa Hammoud,
Yes.
Mary Lane,
Yes.
Celia Nasser.
Yes.
Mary Petrikov.
Yes.
James Thorpe.
Yes.
President Mead.
Yep.
It's unanimous.
So where
Sorry,
were we?
the boss here is.
No, I understand. So just like we did with Dearborn, even before the board said to go forward with it, we got the direction from the board to at least start investigating it with the architect, because right now they're just constructional estimates, just ballpark budget numbers. That would actually start going forward with the architect to start planning the process until the board decides either to move forward with it or stop. We incur some architectural costs, but nothing beyond that.
Okay. You know what the alarm is? It means we're snowed in here. We're gonna spend the night.
yeah,
I've been here all
Just
day,
for the
so.
record.
as long as the power doesn't go out.
So
Nobody's parked on the
We get
street,
some-
are they?
Do we have some cots, Tom? That
Yeah,
was-
just the planning itself takes 3 to 6 months to
Sure.
do this
I
type of
just
thing.
wanted to be
And if
very
we wanna
clear what
wait
we're doing is
3
this
to
is
6
not-
months to make the decision, it's another 3 to 6 months after that, is what Ms.
Yes, sir.
Fletchkoff was trying to refer to.
So what is going to be on the board? What's the motion for?
Dr. Mead, I think I can answer your question. I think there's going to be a motion. You and Dr. Maleko set the agenda. There's going to be a motion on the agenda. If we go with it, we go with it. If not, then, anybody can introduce a motion, and that's something we can iron out that night.
I was talking about the expenditure for Edsel. What is it?
So
Edsel
at this
for?
point, the only expenditure that'll be on the board for sure is the Dearborn High for classroom addition.
All right.
We've gone out and actually solicited bids, it's been designed,
Okay.
they've come back, so now it's the board to actually approve the contract to move forward.
Exactly. Thank you.
And the other thing that will potentially be on the agenda that is boundary changes. And which boundary change?
So will we have several motions or one motion?
No, that would, two different motions, one for.
I understand. What's the one with the boundary? What would that motion
Do we have
be?
some kind of consensus right now of what we're,
I
I
think the
thought we did.
administrative team has a good clue which direction we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be a discussion with Dr. Maleko and his cabinet members, then they'll come back to you with their
Mm-hmm. and they'll
recommendation.
put whatever on there and we'll vote for it.
All right, I'm comfortable with that.
What else are we going to have on the agenda? Are we going to be able to focus in case we have more participation from the citizens? Are we going to have a full agenda? Or is it going to be focused mostly on this?
Well, it's the pleasure, of the board. We did have the read by third grade presentation, then we were gonna do boundaries as discussion, but we have no other items, other than we do have a celebration of the ratings by, our 95% graduation rates, our Mackinac and Bridge Magazine academics. So that would be a big presentation. That'll just be, we're bringing that, and I have to confirm some of that.
What I'm hearing trustee Thorpe say is he doesn't wanna stay here till 11 o'clock.
Sure, yeah. I thought you wanted 12, no, okay.
I
No,
heard that
we're gonna
too.
keep it, I mean, I can, Dr. Mead,
Cut
we
the
can
agenda.
talk if we wanna clear it. We have the read by
There's
third
other
grade.
business items we still have to take care of in addition
Sure,
to this
sure.
conversation, but maybe no additional
Presentations.
discussions or presentations.
That's what I'm
I think that's what he's
Okay.
referring to.
Trustee Hamud, you want to?
I just really appreciated trustee Thorpe bringing up that point.
Yes.
I guess she doesn't want to hang around too long either.
Have we had enough? All right.